Welcome to the New England and New York Real Estate Journal podcast. I'm your host, Rick Kaplan. Today's guest is Andrew LaFuente, and he is with LaFuente Sign Awning. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Rick. Thank you for having me.
So, Andrew, tell us a little bit about your journey to where you got today, which is kind of interesting.
So I got involved in this industry because my parents started a company in the late 1980s in Cambridge, Massachusetts, doing applique flags and banners. And as their company grew, they eventually got into different signage elements, those elements being flagpoles, signage, and awnings. So when I was 12 years old, my father invited me on an awning installation in Burlington, Massachusetts. And I just remember that very vividly, getting inside the truck, loading the awning, working with the installers, the tools, the sounds of the drills and everything else. And I just fell in love with awnings right there. And I told myself at 12 years old that this is what I wanted to do and this is what I wanted to make my life's work. Eventually, all throughout high school, all throughout college, I really didn't work any jobs outside of the family business. And my parents, Rick, were very smart because it wasn't like, oh, Andrew is the boss's son. You know, he's just going to be up in the office making phone calls or doing paperwork. They put me in very low level departments. So I would go out with the installers, I would work on the installations, the welders, the seamstresses, the printing, the real nitty gritty of the business. And the way I was trained was, you're not going to be given anything. You're not entitled to anything here. You're going to start at the bottom, you're going to work your way up so that you understand every aspect of this business. So I graduated Bentley University in 2012, and I went in, worked full time for my dad, and I headed the sales and development department, and I just loved it. You know, it was like my father always said, my mother and my father came to this country from Portugal when they were very young. They came here with nothing and they built the base. They did all the hard work, and it was the truth. And my parents always taught my siblings and I, you guys are coming in, you take it to that next level, but the hard work is done. It's just essentially adding gasoline to the fire. And when I was 24 years old, my parents ended up getting separated, and my father actually fired me from the family business. And at the time, that was incredibly difficult because I had given the last 12 years of my life to that company. And I expected, to take it over at some point. I was incredibly close with my father, as any son should be. He was my best friend. I absolutely idolized that man. And for that to happen the way that it did happen was absolutely devastating. It was crushing for me. When that happened, Rick, I think I took like 6 months working for two other companies, and they were just totally outside of the industry. I said to myself, I'm going to see, if I have any other interest, if there's anything else that I wanted to pursue outside of signs and awnings, because that's what I had done, for the last 12 years. And I just absolutely hated it. And eventually I told myself, I'm going to start my own business. I was reluctant at first just because you're starting something essentially against your father. You're competing with your father. So those thoughts cross your mind, like, what are people going to think? Why is Andrew competing with his dad? And so on and so forth. But no one really knew what had happened, that he had fired me for, because of my parents' divorce and just, the silliness of that whole thing. And I ended up starting the company out of my mother's house, out of her garage. And those first like 6 months, 8 months, I sold one job. I made cold calls the first 4 months. It took me 4 months to sell my first job. And when I got that first job, it took me 2.5 months to do it. Something that today would take us like 2 or 3 days. And when I started the company, my father filed a lawsuit against me, said that I was stealing competitors and this whole thing. He would call vendors and ask them not to sell to me. So I couldn't even buy steel. I couldn't buy fabric. There was a company up in New Hampshire that I ended up contracting to help me build the frames, to stretch the fabric. And I went through that for about a year and a half. And then eventually I rented a space, a 2,000 square foot industrial space in Stoneham. And today I'm in a 6,000 square foot facility in Everett. And that happened over a 5 or 6 year period. So slowly you take these baby steps to eventually get to the place that you are, but the journey has not been an easy one. And I think that when people go through sorts of challenges and hardships, it can go one of two ways. It can either crush you, and it definitely could have when my father fired me. There was no question about that. Or you can use that as motivation. You harness that negativity and all of those obstacles to say, I'm not going to let anything stop me. And you hone in on the vision that you have for yourself and your life and the company, and you just pursue it. You put your head down and you go to work. And that's what I did.
Well, I have to commend you because you definitely have described the true meaning of entrepreneurship.
Sure.
You never accepted anything but success.
Right.
Any failures that happened, you went right through them, and any obstacles, you went right through them, and you created your business. Because if you gave up back then, you know, it just would have been, you just would have just probably be working for someone right now.
You'd be working for somebody. That's right.
But it's an interesting business. Uh, you started with your father. You were around 12 years old,
Correct.
and you learned all different aspects of the industry.
Absolutely.
So you can sew, you can weld, you can do all of that.
All of it.
So when you first started, were you building all the awnings yourself?
Well, me with the gentleman up in New Hampshire, with the company that I contracted, you know, but it's kind of interesting to the point you said earlier, growing up in the industry. I was lucky because my parents' business, they had a fantastic business. They do all the work for the Red Sox, like a 30-year account, the Super World Trade Center, Faneuil Hall. They did Olympics, the WWE, NBA, NHL. So I was fortunate because I was exposed to really high-end clients very early on. So it wasn't like, we're just in search for any business, or we're fortunate for anybody who calls. It's like there was an expectation. We do a very high-end product, and our clients are very good, and we need to make sure that we take care of those clients. So being exposed to that, Rick, at such a young age, when I went out on my own, I didn't have this mentality necessarily like, oh my God, like how am I going to find clients or whatever. It's like you're in that frame of mind where you almost expect to succeed. Even though you're starting at the bottom, your mindset is, I'm going to make it. It may not happen a year from now, it may not be 5 years from now, but it's eventually going to happen. So it's kind of interesting when people talk about like motivation and discipline and so forth. Those things don't come because you're just saying it or even because you think it. Those motivations, like the hurt that I felt when my dad fired me, that motivation came, and I used that motivation when it was 1 o'clock in the morning and I had to stretch awnings for an install 6 or 7 hours later. It's like that's where the motivation comes in. That's where you harness everything that you went through, to get to the point that you are. It's not some fairy tale thing where like, oh, I'm so motivated, I'm so disciplined. No, that's not the case. You have to be able to harness all of those things to use it in the times where it actually is difficult and you want to give up, but you don't.
But that's also, you also have a sense of pride. Uh, I can tell. So being in business, especially with the type of work you're doing,
Yes.
every job you do, you probably have that sense of pride that you want to put into that job, because you want people to look at what you did and say, geez, what a nice awning that is, or a nice,
Sure.
a nice design they put together in front of my store.
Yeah.
That's a good feeling.
Yeah.
You
But
know,
something,
it,
Rick, it's interesting you say that because when you start a business, you have to take the jobs because you need the money. There is no money. I started this business with basically zero in the bank account. So whatever anybody called for, if they wanted a sticker for the side of their truck, I would do it because I needed the money. And to your point, the biggest luxury that I have today is deciding who we want to work with. We get a number of calls, but the biggest luxury you can have as a business owner is turning clients away. So when you can be selective with who you want to work with, to your point, that's the greatest luxury in business because we don't necessarily want every single awning project. We want the ones that, to your point, we can display what we're really capable of fabrication wise, and that we're going to take pride in saying, okay, we did this job. It was a very complicated job. They came to LaFuente, they came to LaFuente for a reason, and we were able to deliver on that project.
Now, I know a little bit about the industry because when I was a kid, I was in the sign business.
No kidding.
So I was a salesperson in the sign business.
Uh-huh.
But I used to see all the designs and how they would build all the signage.
Sure.
And, I would go out on jobs and I would measure and, quote what they were looking for. And someone else would go back and then they design it for me and I give it to the client. But, I didn't build it, but after it was put up, I always had that sense of accomplishment. I would look at it and I was feel proud that it was done and it looked nice.
Mhm.
So I understand what you're talking about. Now, the business has changed quite a bit
Absolutely.
because now you say you started it could take what 2, 3 weeks or 6 weeks or something like that to build the awning,
Sure.
and now it takes 2 to 3 days. So,
Exactly.
what what parts have changed to make that much easier to produce a product?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I think is important and worth mentioning is that the awning industry, not just here in Massachusetts and New England, but nationwide, it's a very old industry. You look at the majority of the business owners or awning company business owners, they're all 50, 60, 70 plus years old. They've been in the industry, 30, 40 years in some cases. I believe I'm one of the youngest awning company owners in the country. I'm only 34 years old. And the awning industry, like awnings themselves, Rick, they've pretty much stayed the same for the last 100 years or so. Metal is metal. The fabric has obviously changed. The application of graphics has changed. But in terms of the structure of an awning, that has pretty much stayed the same. So when I was growing up as a kid, I always told myself, I want to modernize the awning industry as much as possible. Because when I was a kid, seeing how our competitors operated, and even the way my father's company operated, there were always a number of things that I didn't like. The way that the installers dressed, as an example, the presentation of them wasn't always the best. Like the jeans would be dirty, the shirts would be dirty, they would show up on a job site, tools scattered everywhere. The scheduling was always off, like the scheduling was never right. You would say that you'd be there one day, something would come up, it wasn't properly communicated to the client. So I always told myself, I want to be very efficient and lean in how I operate my business. So if you look at an awning, just a random awning on the street, you can tell if it's a LaFuente awning or not. And when we show up to job sites, if you call us for the first time, it's very systematic. There is a process that has been thought of every step of the way. I leave nothing to chance. There are no mistakes. There is no luck involved in this. It's like everything happens and it's planned for a specific reason. So I always told myself that that's how I wanted to build my company in a way that it's structured where you look at it and it's modern, it's clean, it's a simple process. And I think that that's what I've done. And that's why we've had so much success.
No. And talking about how this industry has changed, I know when I was a kid, a lot of neighborhoods you go through and people would have the awnings on their home.
Sure.
Especially it was like if you were a wealthy homeowner, you had awnings, which
Correct.
you could pull them in or you could leave them out, depending
Correct.
on. I don't see that very often anymore in regular residential. Is that residential still a thing with the awnings?
It is not so much the window awnings, Rick, but the retractable awnings. So like for people's decks or porches in the back of the home,
Oh
the
yeah.
retractable, you'll see that much more often. And then sometimes if there's a landing in the front steps, they'll do a little awning over the front door. But that's more so for like apartment complexes. not so much single family homes. The awnings that you're referring to, there are actually only two manufacturers of those style awnings left in the country. There are only two. So we don't really get calls for that. We'll get calls to see if we can store them for people during the winter. But in terms of the fabrication of that style awning, Rick, you don't really see that very often anymore.
So that's something that has gone away in the design of a residential.
Correct.
Uh, but you do see like shopping strip plazas.
Yeah,
You see
absolutely.
a lot of them with the awnings instead of signage
Yeah,
because they like that nice, neat look.
correct.
And that's usually a requirement of the landlord because he wants that look.
Absolutely.
So you must get a lot of calls for something on that idea.
We do. We definitely do. So a lot with architects, designers, developers, contractors, and builders, landlords, as you suggested. They like the awnings because it's a nice way to promote the business. The color selection is pretty much endless. You can essentially make an awning any color that you like. The shade that it provides, the protection from the elements. So the purpose of an awning goes well beyond, just putting your name on the fabric. There's several reasons to pursue an awning.
And one of the things I remember from back when I was selling signage, that you could put a sign on the building
Yes,
and you could put your name on an awning. The awning was not included in the square footage allowed for the signage.
sure.
I don't know if that's still in play.
Yeah. You say it's interesting you bring that up because we deal with a number of communities across the Commonwealth, across New England, and you would think that the states would work with these municipalities to try to come up with one or maybe several bylaws for what cities and towns can do with respect to signage. Every city in town, every single city in town has a different bylaw for what they will and won't accept. So when it comes time to apply for permits for these things, it's like the process is different every single time. So some cities and towns will do what you just suggested. They won't account for the awning in the square footage of the sign. Others will. Others will say if you put the name as signage, like hard signage on the building, you can't put anything on the awning. Some will say you can't even do an awning at all. It's either or. It's either signage or awning. So every city and town, as I said, is different.
I'm not sure why that is because, they're two separate things really.
They are.
And, an awning has multiple purposes for it when you put it on the building.
Right.
And the sign has one purpose, and that's have your name on it. But I don't know. I don't make those rules,
Right.
unfortunately, because they wouldn't be there if I did. So now, how far out do you go to put these awnings on?
Yeah.
Do you go outside of New England?
Outside of New England. So we've gone all over the country. We've gone to California, we've gone to Oregon, Texas, Florida. We're actually doing a job right now for the Cheesecake Factory in Greenville, South Carolina. Chicago, I've done work, Illinois. So we go all over. I have a vision for this company, Rick, and my ultimate goal is to be the largest awning manufacturer that this country has ever seen. And no one has been able to figure out how to do it yet. And I think that I have the infrastructure and the foundation to eventually do it. I'm not there yet, but by the time that I finish my career, I think that I'm going to be the best known awning manufacturer that this country has ever seen.
Now, is it just canvas awnings, or is there
No,
any type,
yeah.
any other?
So you have canvas, you have vinyl, and then you have the metal, the standing seam metal. So we're beginning to do a lot of work with that as well, where it's strictly metal. There is no canvas at all.
So you say metal.
Yes.
How is a metal awning? Uh, you must have to have some kind of supports go down to the ground if it's metal. I would think that's kind of heavy.
No, you don't. So when we do that, it's all aluminum. So are you familiar with Yankee Lobster over in
Yeah,
Seaport? Okay.
yeah.
So they
And the
did a
seaport.
renovation. Yeah, exactly. So they just did a renovation on their facade, and we did the awning for them. All aluminum, all standing seam. I want to say, Rick, it was something I want to say it was like 55 or 60 feet of awning, and it projected off the building 5 feet, which is a lot. Normally at 5 feet, you have posts to support the awning, but we were able to engineer this in a way and use a specific depth in the metal that there were no need for any posts. So it is done. We work a lot with structural engineers and so forth just to run those calculations to make sure that if it is freestanding, that the wind loads, the snow loads, especially in that area, will be able to sustain it.
So basically has some kind of a iron frame under it, and that attaches to the building.
Yeah, so you have the truss work. And again, in this particular case, it was all aluminum. So you
So
have the
even
truss.
the support beams under the awning, those are aluminum as
So
well?
that there are no support beams under that awning.
No.
Nothing,
Huh.
nothing. We through bolted all the way into the building using threaded rods. So you fasten it from the outside, you fasten it from the inside, and that's it. You have the hardware that's supported by those threaded rods, and the awning sits in right into that hardware.
So so is a cloth, now this moving on, a
Yeah,
cloth or I don't know what you would call it. I would
fabric.
say fabric
Yeah.
and or vinyl, which is a better choice for people? I would think cloth would or fabric would last longer, maybe.
Yeah, so I like the fabric, the acrylic fabric. People are most familiar with Sunbrella. That's probably one of the more popular fabrics in this country. Sunbrella is made here in North Carolina. And there's also a competitor named Tempo Test. Tempo Test is an Italian manufacturer. Same exact material as Sunbrella, but there's a tighter weave on the fabric. So I actually like using Tempo Test more than Sunbrella for that reason. They also offer a stronger warranty from excessive fading. So if you pick the right color, I've seen awnings go north of 15, 18 years in some cases, if it's well taken care of. I don't like doing vinyl, Rick, just because here in New England with the cold weather, it cracks, it fades, the graphics fade much quicker depending on the color of the graphics. So I don't like using the vinyl. The fabric, we hand paint the graphics, so nothing ever happens to the graphics if they're hand painted, other than just getting dirty over time. But the fabric option is, in my opinion, definitely the better option.
Now, I've also seen the awnings that have backlighting inside them.
Sure.
You do stuff like that as well?
Yeah, so we actually do a little bit of a different process. Normally, when you see the backlit awnings, Rick, it's the whole thing that lights up. So if you go to like a 7-Eleven, a Burger King, or something like that, the whole thing lights up. I never liked that. I always thought that that was a very cheap look. So we do a process where, and we actually did this for the restaurant Mita, which is in Fenway. And we're doing it again for a business here in Everett, where we'll get the Sunbrella fabric or the Temple Test fabric. And if they have a graphic, whatever it is, call it Rick's Restaurant, we laser cut the letters on the fabric. And then what we do is we heat seal translucent vinyl, white translucent vinyl normally, behind the acrylic. And what that does is once you stretch the awning on the fabric and you turn the light on, instead of the whole awning light up, just the letters of the graphic lights up. It's a very crisp and precise look. It's really top notch in terms of illuminated graphics. You can't get better than that.
Hmm, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's not something you see very often.
Well, it sounds a little more of it's high end, I would say.
Super.
It, so is it very costly? A lot
It
more
is.
costly to do something like that?
Yeah, it is. It
Yeah.
is.
So, I mean, you'd probably see that in like a high-end restaurant or um, high-end retail stores, things like that.
Correct.
Now, I do see and you can tell some of these awnings at a high end in some of these high-end hotels, like
Sure.
in the city.
Yep.
Now, I I would think that it's the same material, same kind of cloth or fabric, but they have like embroidery or I'm not really sure on the terms but it's very kind of luxurious, royal looking.
Sure.
almost like royalty.
Yep.
And what's something like, what do you call something like that?
Of course. So you actually can do embroidery on this fabric.
Oh, okay.
Like we just did a job for the Hilton in Back Bay. Right? We just recovered their awning. And the awning that we took down that we didn't previously do, it was another company, however many years ago, 10, 15 years ago. What they did was they printed their logo and then they embroidered the perimeter onto it. It's a much more traditional look, Rick. Like if you go to Fenway Park as an example, and you look at the banners with all the championship years and the names of the players and so forth, that's applique. That's all embroidered on. It's hand stitched on, like one layer to the other. And that's what they used to do back in the day, back in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. That's the oldest possible way, method that you have for doing graphics. Today, it's either digitally printed, which I don't really like. I never liked the printed stuff. I just think it's cheap quality. Personally, I like the hand painted option where you cut a mask, you place it on the fabric, you heat seal it, and then you paint it by hand and remove that stencil. It's just a really rich look. And it looks like it's applique, but it's not.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting things you can do with the awnings.
There are no limitations, Rick, to what you can do with an awning. And that's what I love about this. It's like you can have a storefront, you can have a building, you can conform metal to any shape that you want. And that's what the aspect of this industry that I always liked. There are no limitations. So the people that I always enjoyed working the most with was like, Andrew, I want an awning. I don't know what I want. Just tell me, give me a recommendation. And to have that freedom, Rick, excuse me, to have that freedom and the trust from those clients to say, Andrew, we trust your judgment. We trust your vision. Just come up with something, propose it, and then we'll have an educated and creative conversation for what we think after you present your initial design. Those are the most fun kinds of projects to work on.
So you like it when you have to design the final project for a client.
Rick, I'm a control freak. So if I can get clients, and most of them do, they say, Andrew, handle every step from us from design, engineering, permitting, fabrication, installation, and maintenance. We handle all of those different aspects. And I'm very big on communication, Rick. Like I probably over communicate with people. So like very rarely is a client calling me because they don't know what's going on. It's more so the other way around because I want to make sure that people are involved, that people are comfortable with what they're getting, and that they know 100% what it is that I'm thinking and the vision that I have for them. And people appreciate that.
Now, it being that it's an awning and
Yes.
similar to a sign, in some fashion, is there any kind of a service policy that you offer to the clients? Because I've seen them where there's a big hole and they're flapping around, with in the fabric and
Yeah.
things like that. They are out in the weather, so they do get beat up a little.
Yeah, sure. It's kind of interesting. We just did a job, Rick, for the Tall Ship of Boston over in Eastie. We did some awnings for them maybe 7 or 8 months ago now. And they called me, the ownership group. They were like, Andrew, we had this other company build these awnings. We're changing the fabric every 4 to 5 months because whatever they're doing, the seams just keep ripping. So I met with them. I went over to the tall ship and the awning was poorly built. Rick, it was just a mess. The welding was terrible. The structure itself, I gave them a price to rebuild the structure. They're like, Andrew, we just don't have the money to do it right now because they had recently purchased those frames. But I was like, let me make the fabric for you. I gave them a price. They approved it. It's been up now 7 or 8 months, whatever it's been. No callback. No callback. Why? We take a lot of pride in the way that we build our stuff, Rick. So to your point, a lot of people have this impression like, oh, an awning is just metal and fabric. How hard can it be? Right? It's pretty simple. The reality is it's not. There's a lot of thinking behind the correct way to do this. So like that job with the tall ship, we sewed it a very specific way to ensure that the awning was going to stay as tight and as close to the frame as possible because you have so much uplift. That wind is just constantly beating against that fabric. So it's not like you can just say to yourself, okay, I'm just going to go make a piece of fabric. If it rips, and you have to buy a new one 4 months down the line. One thing that I hate are callbacks from clients of like something going wrong because we built something the wrong way. I'm very strict about that when it comes to our manufacturing. So when things are being built, I'm always downstairs checking on the fabricators to make sure that we don't cut any corners. Even if I lose money on a job, Rick, I don't care. I don't want anything leaving my shop that is not 100% the way that I expect it to be.
So your customers are always satisfied, no matter what you have to do to satisfy them.
Well, you use something, I don't want to give the impression that we don't run into problems. It's like that's the thing about LaFuente. When something happens, because something will always inevitably happen, right? Something always goes wrong at some point. But one thing I don't do is disappear. I don't disappear. I don't make excuses. Something goes wrong. I own up to it and I fix it
The way it's supposed to be.
the way it's supposed to be.
That's right.
Sure.
So, you bring up a good point. It's like any other business. You're going to have guys that are just in it for, they slap things together just to
Sure.
get it out there. They'll give the cheapest price
Yep.
and they'll end up giving out the cheapest product,
That's right.
and it will last 3 days, where if you spent the extra money, it lasts 3 years or longer.
Sure.
Uh, some clients out there, I'm sure, are just looking for a price. They
That's
don't
right.
understand good quality, bad quality,
That's right.
All they understand is cheap, cheap, cheap.
Yep.
And you get what you pay for. It's always the case. You're never going to get something for nothing.
Well,
So,
listen, Rick, and to my point earlier about being selective with who you can work with. Like when I get these calls, I can tell within the first few minutes if it's just a nickel and dime kind of conversation or if they're serious about getting a good product. So once you're able to establish the kind of client or potential client that you're talking to, you can very politely tell them it's like, listen, with all due respect, thank you for the call, but I don't think we're the right company for you. But to have that luxury to turn business away, I mean, it's a huge luxury
well, I think in the long run, it probably saves you time and money
and money. Yep,
by not dealing with that kind of a client.
that's right.
It's unfortunate that people are like that, but you know what? It ends up being their problem, and why do you need their problem to become your problem?
And sometimes those people will go with somebody else and they end up calling you back 4 or 5 months later.
Yeah. So, when they come around, that's when you want to deal with them. Let them get what they think they want, and when they come around seeing that it wasn't what they needed and wasn't what they really thought they were getting, then they come around.
That's right.
So you said you go all over the place.
Yes.
Yeah. So obviously you can't have your same installers doing a job in California that they would be doing in Boston because they're based out of Boston. So how do you do that? Do you have sub dealers, subcontractors that you hire?
Yeah, so I deal with a lot of subs. Like this industry, it's very difficult to find people to work, because it's just a very skilled, labor intensive industry. And quite frankly, it's a dying industry. Just a little side note, once COVID kind of hit, I've counted, Rick, I want to say it's like 10 or 11 competitors just in Massachusetts, awning companies that have closed over the last 4 or 5 years. And we're losing a lot of competition and a lot of people in this industry specifically for that reason. So like some of the jobs that we did in California, we did a Forever 21 in Seattle, right outside of Seattle, Washington. And that was all Boston subcontractors, the installers. I flew them out there. They came with me and we did that work over there. But like Chicago, when we did the awning out there, that was a local sub. Florida was a local sub. Greenville, I'll take the guys from Boston. So it all depends, but the installation network is probably the biggest challenge to scaling in this industry. So that's the thing that I probably focus on the most.
So do you have like a foreman or a shop manager that goes out to those jobs when they're out of state?
No, that's all me.
So you go and
Oh
you
yeah.
go and make sure they do the right thing when you.
Yeah, I'm very involved. I'm not a hands-off personality, Rick, at all.
So how
So
do you duplicate Andrew?
yeah, so that's a great question, right? So it took me a long time to be able to begin to delegate tasks to like subcontractors and other people, just because when you are a control freak, you think that you're the only one in the world who can do it and that you can do it the best. So that kind of put a limit on my growth a little early on. And after a couple of years, I realized, to your point, like if I don't duplicate myself or teach people how to do this, I'm never going to scale and I'm going to stay the same size forever. So, I hired more subs, got more people in here, taught them how to stretch the awning, how to weld and so forth. And that's where we began to see some growth. But it also got to a point now, Rick, where I want to control the growth as much as possible. Like I don't want to become too big too quickly, just because there are too many things that can go wrong in this industry. If the
Right,
welding isn't right, if the installation's not right, and God forbid an awning falls down on somebody, and hits somebody, right?
right,
That's a major, major problem. You
right. All
know,
you need is that one bad
just one.
accident or
Yeah,
bad thing that happens to ruin your name.
yeah, exactly correct. So I like growth, but I like controlled growth, and that's what I'm striving for.
Well, right now I heard there's a lot of federal government employees that are going to be looking for jobs. So you might be able to staff. Do you have a training crew?
I don't think those guys want to be welding awnings, Rick.
Yeah, well, we'll see what kind of jobs they'll take. You
Yeah,
know,
that's right.
but you might not even want them because most of them that are being let go that they're saying they didn't work anyway. So,
That's right.
but
Yeah, I don't think they would be too happy doing the kind of work that I do.
yeah, but you say they might not be happy with putting the federal employees. I would think when someone comes into this type of a business, any kind of a operation where you're building something,
Yeah.
from nothing. You
Yep.
start with nothing and then you end up with, you know, it feels a sense of pride and accomplishment at the end where you
Yeah.
look at it and you say, I did that, I built that with my own two hands. You walk down the street with some people and you're saying, I did that, you're pointing it out, it's a good feeling.
Yeah. You know something, Rick? It's so interesting, right? My parents started a business similar to this, right? That's how I got into it. And they're immigrants to this country. So that like the immigrant mentality is go to school, become a doctor, become a lawyer, whatever, right? And my mother to this day, she's like, Andrew, like, I don't understand you. It's like I'm very well educated. I have several degrees from Bentley University. She's always like, why do you want to do this? Like, go get an office job, go work in finance. I'm like, Mom, I just love it. It's like when you're truly passionate about something. And that's why, Rick, I think people enjoy working with me because you can't BS authenticity, right? It's like if you walk into this door and I show you the showroom, I show you the facility, the conversation, you can just tell that this is something that I genuinely love to do and I'm passionate about it. People can sense that. Whereas if you go to some of these other places, they're just looking to sell a job. And that's not the case with us. So I just think it's the best job in the world. Like I wouldn't trade this for anything.
Well, I think you're getting a lot of gratification from it too. So,
Oh yeah.
that makes going to work very worthwhile, makes for a good life.
Well, when people also believe in what you believe in, and they want to be a part of that journey, whether it's just giving you business or giving you encouragement or mentorship or referring people, potential clients to you because a friend of theirs or a family member needs an awning or needs a sign. I mean, that's the ultimate compliment. And to the point that you were mentioning earlier too about, pride and going around the city and looking at the work that you do and so forth. It's really cool because I was born in Boston, and seeing the change that the city has gone through over the last 10 years. I always tell people, like, everyone focuses on the height of the city, right? Like the city's getting taller and so forth. But we've had a major impact on the facades of the city. You have the Main Streets programs and the city investing all kinds of dollars to improve the facades and renovations and so forth. We've been a major part of all that. So when I drive to the West End, the North End, Seaport, Fenway, Dorchester, JP, and you see in each community 7, 10, 15 projects that you've done and that your name is on. I mean, there's no better gratification knowing that you've played a part in the development of the city.
Well, it sounds like you're doing the right thing, Andrew.
I'm
You know,
trying.
and I think you'll get the success you want. Well, I shouldn't say get the because it sounds like you're successful now. I think, but you want to achieve another level of success, and I think you'll get to that point because you have that kind of drive. It sounds like. So, we'll just keep an eye out and watch what happens.
Appreciate that.
We wish you all the best on that in the future. I thank you for coming on the show, Andrew. We're talking with Andrew LaFuente, and he is with LaFuente Sign and Awning. I'm Rick Kaplan. We are listening to the NEREJ NYREJ podcast, and until next time.